Yesterday I said what's most important to me about FLAIRS, and that was the encouragement and the enthusiasm for students and postdocs and early researchers. I'm very passionate about that, and I think it's a wonderful atmosphere for encouraging people coming through in their careers. If there's another thing that I think FLAIRS is just wonderful for, it's trying to embrace a relationship between academia and industry. And that can be a dirty word sometimes and a dirty concept. So I'm really enthusiastic about how we embrace it here. And I'm particularly grateful to people like David and Jeff. They started an industry track this year. So this afternoon we're going to be talking directly about the importance of industry and AI. And I was really thrilled when I was asked last year whether David would be a plenary speaker for us, because again, it keeps that very much in the forefront of the relationship between industry and academia. I think as researchers, you know, it's kind of cool to do work in a vacuum without constraints, but at the same time, we might also see industry as being a gateway into more interesting research, and I think that there's something beneficial going on there. So as much as we can encourage it, I think that's wonderful. So I just wanted to say that about 3 years ago I met this guy, David Johnson. I was still working at a university at that time, and David's a visionary, and he had an idea about 3 years ago, and he's going to talk about the development of Dakota and how he came together with AI and its needs and industry's needs. And David's vision was amazing, and his company, I think, is going to really change the world. It's a cliche, but in this case, I think it's a really good one. So he had a lot of questions about AI, and I took him along to the University of Memphis. We have an institution for intelligent systems there. And I lined up all of my friends, lots of postdocs and graduate students and faculty, and said, hey, have at it. You've got questions? Go ask these people. And everybody just lined up and wanted to help them. David told them about his vision and all of his questions. And at the end of about a couple of hours of this chat, one of these people who just finished his PhD, was just becoming a postdoc, and he's a fantastic guy, and I love him to death, and he's very funny. And he was so excited at the end of this meeting. He was kind of jumping up and down, and he said, I'm just so excited, I'm just so thrilled, because all these years I've been doing all of this work, and I've got my PhD, and I've never thought about how my work has got anything to do with the world. And here you are, and you're talking about it, and that's great. And he was so enthusiastic, and he was so happy, and I was so happy for him. And at the same time, I was terrified that we do so much work, we do all of our PhD stuff, and we really don't consider deeply enough how much we can have a relationship with industry, and it needs to be better. And that's what we're encouraging here, especially with David coming in here to talk about that. So I know that we're not responsible to industry, and I know that we're not responsible for industry, but at the same time, I think that we can have a good, honest, open dialogue and learn a lot from each other. And part of that journey is what David will be telling us about today. So, David Johnson, CEO of Dakota International.
Good morning, everyone. A couple of things I'd like to thank Phil for in fact moving the ocean next to the hotel. And his next task is to move the ocean next to the office in Memphis. So that would be a really good trick if you could do that for us. We'd all appreciate that. Can you hear me? Can everybody hear me? Okay. Okay, good. All right. So I really appreciate the opportunity to spend some time with you guys this morning. And when we talked about what the conversation was going to be about, it was really discussed as really looking at the crossing the chasm as it relates to data science, specifically as it relates to really understanding how we can apply different principles to create insights. And that's been a really interesting journey for us over the course of the development of Dakota. And so I want to walk through that today. So it's a little bit of a historical walk through the navigation of the development of a company, but I think there are some really interesting facts in here, and I think it applies not only to business, but it really applies to the academic world as well. So I just wanted to talk a little bit about Dakota for a second. We are still a small company. We're approximately 10 people, and we're growing very rapidly. We're continuing to hire. And what we focus on is we are in a text analytics space. We basically look at analyzing text for major organizations to help them identify insights in that data that can be used to create more actionable, engaging relationships with consumers. But we also participate with some other organizations like government, where we're looking at, for the state of Georgia, helping them with childhood sex trafficking as an example, and looking at how we can help in the detection of those types of occurrences so the authorities can get involved and begin to have an impact there as well. So we have a broad purview in terms of the different markets that we're looking at engaging in, and we wanted to bring a new and innovative way to help our clients get to the bottom of what's most important relative to what they're tracking. So I thought I would start by looking at a couple of quotes from our customers. So one of our largest customers is Procter & Gamble. If everybody's familiar with Procter & Gamble, I assume. Procter & Gamble, outside of the academic world and outside of the government agencies, probably has one of the largest cognitive science organizations, probably has one of the largest stables of text analytics people within their organization, and they're very, very rigorous in terms of their approach to looking at consumer-related information. And they're never satisfied. And the stakes are getting higher and higher and higher every day as it relates to really kind of working more closely and establishing better relationships with consumers. So I'm going to walk away from the mic for a second, so I'll try and speak up as loud as I can. So Bob McDonald is the CEO of Procter & Gamble, and what he's focused on right now is this concept of something called discontinuous innovation. Discontinuous innovation is something like a Swiffer sweeper. It's a new product that comes out that either extends a category, which could be the cleaning category of products, or it creates a new category in and of itself. And what they want to do is they want to identify what are the attributes and characteristics of products that really represent discontinuous innovation. So they're really focused on what do we do to create new products that have an impact every day, and how do we really get in the heads of customers to understand what we should be doing. Like, how do I understand on a day-to-day basis, what are your unmet needs, right? If I don't know any of you, how do I get that? Is there a way for me to surf the web to understand conversations related to, I wish I had, boy, it'd be great if somebody did. It'd be awesome if someone could really fix this thing because it would solve this problem for us. Our ability to detect those unmet needs create great opportunities for innovation products or innovative opportunities for them to create new products and services that they can bring to the market more aligned with what we need as customers. So he's the CEO. Mark Pritchard is the CMO, Chief Marketing Officer at Procter & Gamble. And so his goal, based upon what Bob wants to accomplish, is I want to establish a one-to-one relationship with every single person in real time. So today, what shows up in your mailbox at home or in your email box is based upon something called a segmentation structure. You're either an A customer, a B customer, or a C customer. That's based upon your demographics, your socioeconomic status, and a wide variety of other characteristics, right? But what that is that's a mean, right? That's who you are generally speaking. But on a day-to-day basis, you know, we're having good days, we're having bad days, things happen with our kids, you know, things happen with our jobs. What would happen if I had the ability to detect those emotions on a real-time basis and incorporate that into the segmentation structure? Now, when you walk into a store, when you look in a window, if I understood that, would that change how I engage with you in a more creative, more personal fashion? And that's what companies are really focused on doing, and that's what companies like P&G want to do. Joan Lewis is the person at Procter & Gamble that owns innovation. So she's also an officer of the company. And Joan's really targeted kind of from the inside of the organization, but actually speaking publicly to the rest of the world, saying, you know what, you're gonna shake this bag up called P&G, and we're gonna recalibrate how we do research because we need to do a better job of it. And so what she's saying is, you know, we got to get out of methodology. Traditional surveys, that isn't working, right? Why is it taking us 3 months to put a survey out? Why is it taking us a year to get the information necessary for us to innovate a new product? We really work with pulp and paper and plastic injection molding machines. We should be able to create products more quickly that more are in line with the needs of the customers on a real-time basis. So these are the things that big companies want to accomplish today. In addition, you have organizations like the state of Georgia that I talked about. There was a group that was commissioned to go to the White House a couple of weeks ago, and they talked about childhood sex trafficking. Unfortunately, Georgia is one of the top 2 states in that category. And so Georgia is also one of the only organizations that has, only states that has an organization very similar to the FBI and almost as large a scale called the GBI, Georgia Bureau of Investigation. So we met with them, we talked about how we could potentially address this issue related to understanding how could we really engage and intercede in the process of child and sex trafficking. And so they kind of talked about the problem, and it's very, very interesting. So most children that get involved in child and sex trafficking are runaways, and they come from difficult family situations. Well, guess what? There's something in Tumblr called the dark side of Tumblr, if you're not familiar with it. And it's this place where people talk about things like depression, sex, self-harm, things like that. It's not a good place to be, but people spend a lot of time talking. And a lot of the children that end up in child and sex trafficking rings or start by communicating through Tumblr. Then when they run away, we can get a picture of them, right? So now what happens is these kids go on to Craigslist and they start offering themselves because they have to find a way to sustain themselves once they've left home. And then they end up in this cycle of going into a situation where they're in this business and then they come out and they go back in because they run away and so on. And so what we talked about with the Georgia Bureau of Investigation is we will basically create a method that allows us to detect what people are talking about in areas like Tumblr. We will capture pictures from runaway child lists. Then what we will do is we will go in and scan something like Craigslist. We will look at the conversations that are most closely resembling something like an ad for sex, and then we will also take that picture and we will do an image detection, and that picture will correlate the two. If we have a connection between them, the GBI will then set up a date with that person, get them out, and then basically extract them from that environment and get them into some sort of a halfway home. So these are the ways that our technology and the things that we can do can have a real impact, not just from a business perspective, but also have an impact on society as a whole. Going back to the business side, when we talk to business world today, you know, the world was always about pure math, right? We see a lot of that in data science today in the business world. Boy, if you can do regression and you can do math, you can call yourself a data scientist, you're gonna get paid a lot of money in the business world. It's just that simple. But the reality is that we're moving away from that, and it's no longer just about, is it statistically significant? Can you tell me what it means? Can you tell me what the story is behind what we're seeing happen in real-time, actionable information on the web? And that's what people are really kind of navigating toward going forward. Unfortunately, the problem's getting harder and harder and harder, right? 7 billion people in the world, 6 billion cell phones. It's predicted that we're going to have 30 billion wireless connected devices. Those are essentially sensors, right, for capturing information. So it's going to be non-linear, right? We're going to have so many opportunities to capture information. Just think about Google Glasses for a second, right? Just think if we all were wearing Google Glasses, we're all on right now, we were recording this. Just think about all that information that's being collected at any moment in time that needs to be analyzed. So data's exploding, right? Up until 2008, roughly 800 exabytes of information. 35,000 exabytes forecasted in 2020. To give you a dimension on that, an exabyte data stacked on CDs, 1.25 the distance to the moon in 2008. Between 2008 and 2020, 44x increase in the explosion of data, right? Huge, huge. So there's a big focus on what we're going to do with big data, and the demand for data scientists is going through the roof. But the definition of what a data scientist is changing very, very rapidly, at least in our mind. So now what I'm going to talk about is I'm going to talk a little bit about Dakota, and then I'm going to come back to how we actually got here. So how we position ourselves is we are essentially the Shazam for emotion and detecting a consumer state of mind, right? We can look at a document, we can instantaneously tell you what your state of mind is, we can tell you what the emotions are, and we can feed that information back, and we've actually been independently proven to be highly predictive of sales, right? So that's it. That's what we do, essentially in a nutshell for our clients. How it plays out is, how many people here are focused on text analytics? Some form of text analytics? Okay. All right, so if you are, there is a service, if you're in the academic world, there is a service called Spinner, S-P-I-N-N-3-R. And as an academic institution, you can get untethered free access to this feed. 40 to 50 million documents a day can be ingested for free. So you can get access to all that information. There are many other sources of unstructured social media data today that you're all familiar with. So Facebook, Twitter, Blogger, YouTube, consumer comments off consumer comment sites and so on. There's big data services. If you're not familiar with companies like Omniture and WebTrends, they track all of the web-related information, how you navigate, where you go to and from, as you're navigating through the web. They drop those cookies on your computers and they're tracking all that information. Nielsen has information. If you're inside an organization, there's something called customer relationship management software that they might have, and information about the relationship that they have with you, the consumers, is all contained there. And then there are other applications. So there's a lot of big data. This is, in many cases, structured data. This is unstructured data. And then there's all this survey and research data that exists out there. What customers are looking for today is customers are saying, you know, it's not just social media data, right? It's everything. We want all the unstructured data that we can get our hands on. We want to get our hands on all the structured data that we can possibly get our hands on. And we want to augment it with survey data. Survey data are surveys that you see on the web. Surveys are, you know, basically they could be transcripts from a consumer focus group, things along those lines. So all that information is something is what customers want to bring together. What we do is we allow them to basically ingest all that data into what's called one very large big data platform. Every client can basically have the data that we bring in. So we bring in social media data, but they can append to our social media data their enterprise data and their survey data. So every client has their unique big data asset in the cloud, if you will. When that data comes in, we have a series of analytics that run on that data that allow us to detect a variety of different emotions. We then take the next step further where we can identify themes and topics, and then we can actually go down to identify the drivers. So what I can tell somebody like Procter & Gamble is, somebody doesn't like their Tide Pod. Great. Is that a thumbs up or a thumbs down? Well, that's too abstracted. I can tell them that they're angry about it, and I can tell them that the reason that they're angry about it is because the blue dye in the pod actually stained their clothes. Right? So we can get that specific in terms of telling them why that person is angry with them, as opposed to just a thumbs down, which is how the rest of the world has a tendency to look at social media data. Then we also have this thing called a model shop. This is where we work with other organizations, and we want to open this up to academic institutions, where we're going to allow organizations and people to create their own analytics and put them in our grid. So it's essentially like an app store, which you can create your own analytics algorithms. And you can drop them inside our grid, then customers will come in, and we have something called liquid design. And essentially what they do is they say, oh, I want this data, and I want algorithm A, algorithm B, and algorithm C to run across that data, and it populates a dashboard, or you can export that data to be further analyzed in SPSS, SAS, or R, or something along those lines. So this is a very simple process. I identify the data I want, I run my analytics on it, and then I present the data. And when we present the data, we're presenting this level of granularity as it relates to our emotion scores. So on the negative side, we go for irritation, disappointment, confusion, embarrassment, frustration, disgust, bitterness, contempt, anger, and outrage. What we're competing with in the marketplace are people that go thumbs up and thumbs down, right? That level of abstraction really requires some real labor, right? Because if I'm working with a brand customer and something comes in as negative or thumbs down, well, am I going to engage that person the same way if they're irritated as if they were outraged? Probably not, right? So our ability to draw that distinction in real time creates real value for them so that they can know what to do. Same thing on the positive side, but really at that point we're really more focused on how do we understand the best method of amplifying a positive message out to the rest of the world. So how customers use that data is they use it to predict sales, they can measure performance, we can monitor for very specific conversations. You'd be surprised, with all the technology that we have today, you have scenarios where you have companies that have products that they sell online, and they sell a product, and when somebody sends a complaint in, regardless of what the complaint is, they send the person a coupon for that product, just for providing information back to the company. Well, you'd be surprised the number of scenarios where somebody writes a complaint in and says, hey, you know, my dog died eating your dog food, and they send a coupon back to that person for more dog food. But this is not a rare occurrence. This is all over the place. And the reason this happens is because the world lives in thumbs up and thumbs down. We try and abstract things up for the simple, and we lose a lot of granularity that's really meaningful in helping us understand how we should be working with you more intelligently. Those embarrassing facts are all over the place. We also work with AT&T. You can imagine kind of what we see inside those comments that we get back. And it's just amazing how many times people fall and trip over information that's seemingly obvious. But when you're looking at, you know, 1 million documents a month, right? Something's going to fall through the cracks. And so when you think about that explosion of data that we're going to have, millions are going to turn to tens of millions and hundreds of millions of documents, right? So now I'm going to come back and talk about how we got here, because how we got here has not been a very easy path, but I will say that what we do in the world today, no one can do in the marketplace today. So just to give you a dimension on this, we have the ability to detect 4 billion patterns per second across 8,000 documents per second on 10 server blades. Okay, so we are 240x more efficient with how we operate our hardware, and we consume 5,000x less power to support this type of environment. So that basically means about 700 million documents a day we can analyze in real time with approximately 10 blades in the server environment, compared to other architectures that would require thousands of blades to do this. So yesterday I was sitting in a couple of presentations, heard somebody talking about some work that they did, and very compelling work in terms of entity detection, but I believe they said it was 16 hours to run a small sample of data, right? We work on billions of documents in real time and deliver instantaneous results. And so for what we do, we're pretty much standalone in the marketplace. So when I started Decode, and I met Phil, Charlie and Phil, years ago now, had this great idea. And how it started is I went to the Department of Defense, I saw a presentation for how we monitor for anti-US sentiment for terrorism purposes. And it was fascinating because what they were able to show is that they tracked terrorists, and they didn't look at a terrorist as an individual, they looked at a terrorist based on topics. And they said, this terrorist has these different, we track them across these different topics, and this is their emotion, and this is their sentiment on these individual topics. And they were able to correlate changes in each of those topics for each of those individuals based upon discourse on the web. And I was blown away by that. I was like, oh my God. Every brand marketer on the planet would love to do that with their customers. We'd all like to understand at a topic level, how do you feel about particular topics and what's driving your behavior? And so when I saw it, I saw a demo, right? And so working in the business world is kind of the joke, right? Is it the demo or is it reality? So I saw the demo, like, this is fascinating. It looked like real time. And by the way, the process actually fed the presidential daily brief, and so it was very validated. But then when you started to peel back the layers of the onion, what you saw was, well, they used some latent semantic analysis for some clustering, but then what they did is they basically threw the data under the door to a group of linguists and cognitive scientists, PhDs, and they analyzed the data by hand, and they had 400 people working around the clock, right? So 1,200 people basically analyzing all that data. Back then, it really wasn't as big of a big data problem as it is today because the volumes were so high, but it was still very interesting. So I left that and I said, I'm gonna start Decode. I can do this. I think that we can automate this process. And so when I started, I thought it was going to be a very straight line. You know, I knew exactly where I wanted to go. I understood the marketing space. I understood the sales space. I knew what I needed to do. Well, unfortunately, what it ended up looking like was a lot like this. And by the way, I can tell you, it wasn't the downhill track. It was the uphill track to get to where we are today. To say I was naive would be an understatement. I don't even think that there's a word that would necessarily indicate my level of lack of knowledge in the space. But I went in with the most aggressive goals that I could possibly go in with, because I know that as a chief marketing officer, Mark Pritchard, those people are under tremendous pressure. Mark Pritchard is responsible for spending $4.7 billion on advertising to consumers, right? So if I can find a way to do that slightly more efficiently, I can have a big impact on the bottom line. And what we're finding today is that you know, the longevity of a chief marketing officer can be pretty short if they can't get their head around this pretty quickly. And the role of a chief marketing officer is kind of migrating from kind of the more the advertising-esque type of a role, much more into an analytics and attribution analysis type role. Because what they want to understand is, I have $4.7 billion, and I have all these channels that I can be spreading my money across. What's going to be the most efficient way for me to be spending those dollars going forward? And so what we needed to do is we said, you know what, we needed to be able to analyze structured data, traditional relational data, sampling and surveys, demographics, trend-based information. But we needed to basically, and by the way, we've been doing this for years now, right, with traditional, you know, data warehousing and so on. We have that down. We have point-of-sale information, and we have the web trends information and the internet information, all structured. We know how to analyze that. Unstructured, we wanted to become predictive. We wanted to be able to do all social media data in real time. We wanted to be able to leverage linguistics as well as cognitive science, because we really felt that if we looked at linguistics or computational linguistics independently, that we were going to lose something in the interpretation. So we really saw the value, or believed that there was significant value on the cognitive science side. And we also knew that, by the way, when you have these thumbs up and thumbs down systems today, like, I'll give you an example. Coca-Cola has a product in place that basically tags every comment that comes in as either being thumbs in or thumbs down. That flows into something called a human moderation factory. And that's where people actually read every single thumbs up and thumbs down document to do essentially what we do, to basically put a marker on it and say, what's the emotion and how should we engage, right? So, that's cognitive load. Somebody's got to actually look at it and do something with it. So we wanted to eliminate the necessity of that. We also wanted to be able to incorporate mobile location and other related information into that. So those were our goals. Okay, so, we took the easy path and we said, well, where are we going to go? And so you're familiar with a lot of these different technologies that are up here, right? So we said, well, the first thing we need to do is we need to have parsing capabilities and tokenization and all these other capabilities. We needed tools. We benchmarked out Stanford NLP, we looked at LinkPipe, we actually used some element of LSI already. We looked at Bayesian. There's a product out there called Lexalytics. It's a generic solution you can get access to. Then there's WordNet and so on. Then there's technologies you can use like Lucene, Elasticsearch, Sphinx. There's NoSQL databases out there. Hadoop is the de facto big data platform. MarkLogic as a high-performance database. Neo4j as a solution for what's called a graph database, where you can basically look at relationships between all of you and the things that you shared and do queries based upon relationships. But we ended up having a lot of issues with this. We went through, we evaluated every single one of them, and these convenient decisions all ultimately had big issues on scale and the ultimate outcomes. So what we found is we had these accuracy issues, right? When we created dictionary, taxonomy, and ontology-based solutions, everything being predefined, we weren't able to predefine enough of everything to capture everything. And so, you then either decide that you're going to be domain specific and you're going to own that domain. But unfortunately, with companies like P&G, there are really 300 companies inside a company. It's hard to be one domain, and when you're working with companies like P&G. So we were forced to have this broad purview and say we needed to be able to do everything these types of capabilities, these types of solutions were able to do in a very constrained way across every different type of document. So we had issues with accuracy. If you don't know this, Hadoop is a batch-based solution. Our companies, our clients that we work with, they can't use batch-based solutions. We need real-time, instantaneous information. We don't have time to submit a batch and wait for a response. We had volume issues. They weren't really able to scale, as an example, for a lot of these things. Things like stemming and other solutions like this were throwing too much valuable information out that we thought would be useful. We had moderation requirements. We get into these conversations, and I call them method divas. And what we find is that we'll talk to some people, and it'll be like, you know what, Bayesian, that's the answer. I don't care what your question is, the answer is always Bayesian. You talk to somebody else, it's another thing. You talk to another person, it's another thing. Everybody has their answer. And what we found is that people were so constrained in their thinking, they weren't able to think outside the box and really look at innovative ways for us to readdress the issue. And so as we went through these different solutions, we just realized that we weren't going to get to where we needed to be. So we kind of rebooted. And here at this point, we're about a year into what we're doing. And I stepped back and I had the opportunity to meet a professor at Georgia State University. His name is Dr. Eric Frignell. And he worked with Doug Viber. And he taught me the concept of corpus linguistics. And that was really valuable to me because it made a lot of sense for the first time. Basically saying, Twitter is not Facebook, is not blogs, is not news feeds, right? You have to look at all these things independently because they all have their own unique language, right? And so if you try and apply a one-size-fits-all methodology to text analytics across all those, you're going to have a high degree of false positives. You're going to have error in your analysis. So he really woke us up to that. Then he introduced us to Phil. And what was amazing about Phil is that Phil isn't tied to a methodology or a thinking. Phil is really somebody that looks at the data and says, what's the best approach? And so it's a data-driven approach. And the way that Phil always characterizes it is, I want to give the data a voice, right? And so when we started to talk to Phil about what we wanted to accomplish in the technology that we had in order to be able to do things in real time, we really felt like we had kind of the peanut butter and jelly thing going on. So he then introduced us to somebody in the area of cognitive science. And so we have, Phil in linguistics, corpus linguistics, the computational linguistics or NLP, Phil's background in the English department, cognitive psychology, some examples and skills in the area of sociology. And then WLTC is wisdom of the crowd, and that's where we use a lot of crowdsourcing techniques in order to capture information. So when you look at our emotion scores, everybody says, well, why don't you use Ekman's model for emotion scores? Well, because when I talk to consumers, they don't know who Ekman is. They don't think like Ekman. They think like they think. And so what we did is we went out and we had the crowd define for us how they would characterize the emotions that they have. And so that's what's driven the process for the definition of the emotion scores that we have. And they've been validated back and forth several times, and we're very comfortable with their level of accuracy. So at this point, we had the right answers. We knew we were getting to the right point where we were able to really deliver some intelligent insights, but we had performance issues. It was very complex, and the cost was very high. Because on any particular post, we may be running between 2,000 and 4,000 algorithms on every single post in order for us to do what we do. So it's very intensive. So we're on the right track, but we aren't where we need to be. So we took another step back and we said, all right, so now how are we really going to approach this problem? We feel like we have the right methods. Now this is a bigger problem for us to solve. Well, we really began to come back and really look at how we could leverage software technology and how we could leverage hardware technology. And looking at all those other solutions that were out there, they weren't capable of supporting structured and unstructured data. They weren't capable of supporting streaming data, which is this real-time data off the web. They weren't flexible in terms of being able to adapt from client to client. So those solutions were forcing a one-size-fits-all approach. And so we were forced to create our own big data grid. And right now, we believe that we have the fastest big data grid in the world. And we benchmarked it off all the major players that are out there. We don't sell it as an independent platform. It's just part of our own intellectual property. We created something called an edgeless graph database. Through this process, there are technologies out there. VoltDB is the fastest database in the world right now. It's a memory-based database. The benchmarks that we have early on, we're about 500% faster than the fastest database, which means as I have all these 35,000 exabytes of data, as I have this information coming in, I can insert it into my database and I can extract it out of my database because I want this real-time experience for all my customers. So we established right now what we believe is the fastest database. And then we have this extensible model shop, which means that any of you that want to create an algorithm and put it in my grid, you can. And we will monetize it for you and help you make money on it. Because our clients will then have the ability to have that be a part of their liquid design and as a part of their process. So we created the software. Then we looked at the hardware. And the grid infrastructure leverages what's called a cluster of computers or a cluster of servers. But we still weren't getting the performance that we really needed and that we really wanted. And so then what we did is we said we got to look for something else. So looking at traditional servers, which you're all familiar with, Dell servers, they go in a rack. We began to look at something called FPGAs, field programmable gate arrays. They're devices that can be programmed. They're smaller, they're faster. Inside your computers, there's graphics processing units with the GPUs and how we could leverage all these different components inside computers. And we actually ended up identifying, not developing, but identifying a company that created a technology that was used to detect collisions of the super collider. And so they were capable of taking millions of pictures at the point of collision, basically creating a petabyte of data in a second and analyzing it. And so we contacted them through a relationship, and we actually are creating a joint patent where we're embedding our analytics on that chip, which is what allows us to do the 4 billion pattern detections per second across the documents that we analyze. So my point here is that there's obviously the analytics side of it, there was a software side of it, but we still weren't getting what we needed, so we took another step back and we began to look at hardware partners that we could work with. So now we have this embedded technology that's unique to us. So now we have performance where we're 240x more higher performing than traditional server technology. If you get into the hardware world, believe it or not, the hardware isn't really what's expensive. The power consumption over time ends up being the most expensive part of the server. And so we're 5,000x faster, or 5,000x more efficient. Our infrastructure is flexible, it's the lowest cost. It met our accuracy goals, and it really put us in this position to offer these real-time insights. So recently, as an entrepreneur, you're always looking for really good advice from people that you can trust. And I had the opportunity to meet John Scully. That might be familiar to you. John Scully is the former CEO of Pepsi, former CEO of Apple, the person that fired Steve Jobs. And so I met with him probably about a month ago now, and he was talking through one of the things that he believed was the most important lesson that he learned from Steve Jobs. And he said, Steve Jobs always said, what you want to do when you're looking at a complex problem is you want to zoom out, connect the dots, zoom in, and innovate. And what I learned, he kind of exposed me to it, that's essentially what we did, right? What we did is we thought we were going on a path. We weren't going down the right path. We had to back up and look at the problem differently. And then we got a little bit further, but we felt we still didn't have the problem fully resolved, and we ended up stepping back even further. Once we saw the entirety of the problem, then we could actually identify what the best method was going to be for us to engage and go innovate around what needed to be delivered to our clients. So that's the lesson that was learned. And when I look at it kind of in terms of how it, that's probably my phone, by the way. When I look at it kind of how what the dots are that we connect, well, we've connected our hardware, big data, linguistics, computational linguistics, or NLP, the wisdom of the crowd, software, predictive analytics capabilities, video-focused statistics, sociology, and cognitive psychology. We've connected all that. And when I look at, if I had a request, and what would be easier for everybody, and I think the opportunity exists in the academic world, is we would like help getting across that chasm faster, right? There's conventional thinking, then we looked at interdisciplinary, and then we said, you know what, I think we've really become multidisciplinary in terms of what we're actually integrating. And when I look at the purview of what happens in the academic institutions, there are people all over these academic universities, right, that have all these different skills that are focused on these different things. And I think that if people step back further, there are huge opportunities for big innovation. And by the way, we didn't, none of us were independently wealthy. We did not take a lot of money through this process. There's a lot of sweat equity that went into the development of what we do. And so it's just, people with good ideas, with a shared interest and a passion to do something really interesting in the world. And that's what's led us down the path that we've gone down. So, left to our own devices, it's amazing how lazy business can be. And it's kind of interesting. So I don't know if you've seen this recently. This is what's at stake if we don't get help. So if you haven't seen this, Facebook's approach for how they're going to do emotions is they're talking about creating new emotion-based emoticons. So guess what? Now it's not their job to analyze you and what you're saying for emotion. It's your job to tell them. So you're going to have to go to a different screen, on your iPhone or on your Android phone. You're going to pull up your emoticons. You're going to put all these different emoticons in here and say what you're going to do, right? Or say how you feel. With Twitter, it's going to be hashtag based, right? That's what you have to write. Thanks to company 1, hate. That was the perfect example. I finally pressed a shot at company 2, love, frustrated, but okay, right? That's the simple, lazy way that people are going to approach themselves. So we've taken the hard path, and we've only been able to do it by really kind of taking steps back to get the right types of talent and the right types of people involved to help us solve these problems. So that's been our journey. It's been an interesting 3 years for us to go on this path. We have an incredible group of people, and I really do believe that we do something that's unique in the marketplace. We do something that adds a lot of value, but I don't believe it's anything that anybody else in this room could do by looking at the problem in the same way that we did. And so anyway, I just would like to let you know that we need the academic world's help, right? Anybody that has ideas in terms of other ways that we should be looking at our problems, we'd love to hear them. And as you look at your own problems, the only thing I can say is just take further steps back in order to look at the problem from perhaps a different set of different perspectives, and use that information to find the best way to approach those challenges that we have. Because that's the only way we're going to solve the largest challenges of the day. So that's pretty much it. Does anybody have any questions?
question is really how did you measure that or assess that accuracy? What was the process to be sure that you were accurate compared to the methodology before? And the second question is basically the complexity of the whole goals that you are dealing with. Because you are taking a multidisciplinary approach that involves a lot of different knowledge fields.
Right.
That your company is only 10 people right now.
Right.
So how do you manage that complexity?
Right. So first,
Can you repeat the question so that people over here?
Yeah, I mean, this is.
okay. Yeah. Sorry about that. All right. So the question first was, how do you measure accuracy to assess whether one methodology is better suited to solving the problem than another? Right.
Right.
Right. All right. So the answer to that question is, Phil and Amber use something called a Turing test, right, as a methodology, and then that's essentially where we look at we take our analyzed results, we put it in front of other people, and we get validation back. We also crowdsource our interpretation of the information to get validation from the crowd as well. But as long as that falls within a statistically significant our standard deviation that Phil and Amber are comfortable with, then we leave it alone. If it falls outside that, then we go back and we recalibrate the models. So the way we've been able to scale our knowledge. The second question was given the fact that we're such a small company, how do you kind of scale up the understanding of these different areas and domains, right? And so what we do is we do a lot of crowdsource work. Anybody here familiar with MTurk as an example? Okay, so MTurk we use extensively. We have a great reputation on MTurk. We create some great studies, and what we do is as an example, we'll say frustration. We'll try to understand what frustration means to the marketplace. And Amber will field a study, and it's a study that basically looks at not only how somebody would define frustration, but what are the conditions by which they would enter the state of frustration. What are the conditions by which they will exit the state of frustration? Then we capture information around, give us an example of a Facebook post, a tweet, a blog post of what frustration represents. Send us a picture of what frustration looks like. So Amber takes all that information, we have very large studies that we do, she synthesizes all that information and she works collaboratively with Phil to look at what are the characteristics that we define as frustration. So we leverage a lot of great methodology around the design of those studies, and we can pretty much automate it. That allows us to get that information very, very quickly. And so we've been able to really kind of leverage the wisdom of the crowd and the definition of a lot of that for us. So that's really given us some scale. Right now, our clients include Procter & Gamble, UPS, Ford, AT&T. We'll be launching with Starbucks here very shortly, Pepsi, and a number of other organizations as well. And so we're growing at a very managed basis. So these clients have very similar needs, and so we've been able to scale what we do for one across all of them with limited impact on the organization. But we are growing, we are hiring, we're always looking for great talent. And so if anybody's interested or knows of somebody that'd be interested, I would love to get any information that you have, because we're always looking for the best and brightest talent that we can possibly get our hands on. Any other questions? Yeah.
What's the name of the chip that you're working with? What are its specifications?
I can't tell you that. I'm sorry. It's we're still in the process of completing the
I strongly believe that what you are doing is actually hurting democracy.
I'm sorry, it's what?
I strongly believe that what you are doing is wrong. It's hurting democracy. Basically, your goal is to know what the state of mind about anybody, about anything at any moment. So today you are working with these products, but obviously if you start to be successful with that, all the might is going to be able to do that. You even mentioned that in society is terrorism. And what is terrorism for today for the Syrian government? It's just a political opponent. For China, it's just someone in Tibet fighting for independence. And so once the mighties have this power to know the state of mind about anybody, about anything, you don't have freedom of thought anymore. So you may think that you're American, that you're always on the good side of the wars, but well, that's not true.
Yeah.
And so I really strongly believe it's really something really nasty.
Yeah,
and I invite anybody to stop being on Facebook and Twitter all the time. It's really hurting democracy.
well, I think it.
David, can you say what the question is again?
Yeah, the question is a concern of privacy, how this data can be used in various ways across the globe, and it's the responsibility of the holder of the data to do what's right with the data. And so what we capture is all opt-in data, right? So people opt into what we do. We're actually creating our own crowdsourced platform as well. And so, I mean, I agree with you. I mean, I think that we will have the most desirable data asset on the planet. I do believe that. Now, what's going to happen though is, are you familiar with a company like Axiom or any of the credit companies? So a credit company here in the U.S. is a company called Axiom, or there's Experian, and there's other organizations, and they carry all the credit-related information for all of us, right? They know everything that we've ever purchased. They know everywhere we go. They have all that information. They can't give anybody a specific piece of information unless they have access to credit, unless they're a credit-worthy company. The only other information that they can give out is rolled up, de-identified, aggregate-level information, right? At some point, we will have so much data that we'll have scores. We aren't going to be providing the very refined individual level data. We'll have a scoring mechanism to de-identify the data because of the power. Because you're right, what we'll do is in our edgeless graph database, we will have a dossier on me, right? And you will know everything that I do. There will be dossiers on other people, and you can say, hey, this is somebody that look, this person got divorced. Look, they started to drink. Look, they lost their job. You can start to predict future behavior based upon those events. You'll have more and more of that information. Next thing you'll be able to become very predictive of other things that are going to happen to individuals. And so we're going to have to basically take care of that data and be good stewards of that information, and use it just for the purposes of what we're interested in. We are not going to be a nefarious governmental entity.
Yeah, the problem that it will not happen. If you are successful at that at some point, like the CIA can contact you and say, oh, I'm interested in your stuff to study like this group of Islamic people or whatever.
Right. Well, you know what though?
You cannot refuse. You cannot insult the CIA and say, no, I'm not business with you.
But the thing is, though, they're already.
Problem to do that.
I agree, but they're doing it. Don't think that they're not doing it. They have people focused on doing this every single day. They have access to information inside of Facebook and Twitter because they have the right to get access to that information. I mean, so they're doing it. It's going to happen, right? So unfortunately, that's just the way it is. Any other questions? Yeah.
You mentioned the information of child sex trafficking. I'm just wondering if you had found other, I guess, social kind of applications of your system to other social issues.
We haven't.
Sorry, David.
Yeah, I'm sorry. I'm trainable eventually. So the question was, what other applications outside of child sex trafficking could you do from a social standpoint? There are a lot of things that you could do, but we haven't spent a lot of time in those areas. This is one that was just brought forward to us by one of our advisors. But there are things like communities, as an example. So there are at-risk communities with high crime rates and things along those lines. There are methods for us to actually, capture information, create detection and warning systems, have connections back to different authorities. Like inside the state of Georgia, I had no idea, there's 700 agencies, police-like agencies across the state of Georgia. None of them are connected. So just creating a connection between them would give them access to some of this information could be helpful. But right now, the only thing we've done from a social kind of good standpoint has been really the work that we're doing around child sex trafficking. Yeah, we're doing some work with Wounded Warriors as well. The same person that introduced us to this opportunity, we're doing something with that as well. Yeah.
Do you see any future applications for voice analysis? Doing some kind of profiling when somebody calls a call center or a crisis center or something like that, where you're going to actually identify, categorize, maybe.
Yeah. So this is it's kind of like this. I'm getting better, actually. Got the cough. The question was, how do you see this working with voice and audio and so on? And so, voice, video, and audio are, audio, video, and image detection are all things that we're currently focusing on. And so it just so happens that this card that we're working on was actually designed for image detection. It just so happens that it also can be easily applied to the way that we create something called frames for patterns. And so for voice, we can also look for very similar patterns and decimal levels across the voice and the WAV file. And then we can also do the transcription of that voice to text. We're actually doing that for Procter & Gamble. We're starting a project here in the next couple of weeks. We're doing voice to text transcription analysis and markers in terms of the changes in communication and so on. And so that's something that we'll be doing as well. And that will be collected and stored for every person. So we want the audio files, we want the image files, we want the video files. We want to capture everything. Any other questions that I can repeat? Yeah.
Thank you for your talk. It was really interesting. I was wondering, I'm sure that you also consider like different comments that people put like in the websites, right? And do you also analyze, because sometimes when you go, some of them are false comments that people just come and put, like you can see there's some patterns that people put that they're just like nagging, or sometimes each comment, like there's a pattern that when somebody tries like talking good, the next comment is like relative to the previous one. Do you also consider those kind of relationship between the comments, or is it just you read each comment separately and get the information and just give it to the company, or do you analyze it too or not?
So her question is, how do you handle sequencing of comments across a comment board, and then how do you detect something that might be automated as opposed to a real personal comment? Phil, do you want to talk about that? I mean, so we have. I'll give my answer, and then Phil can come in. So we have one method that it's a frame called is personal. We have the ability to detect whether something's been machine generated or personally generated. So we can make that one detection. The second thing that we can do is we identify is similar, right? So if something's similar or substantially similar, we detect those and decide if we should keep it or not. If it's a 100% match, we typically get rid of it in terms of our analysis because it will skew the analysis if it's just a copy. We look at it differently if it's a retweet. So those are two ways that we handle that. As it relates to sequencing of comments, we really don't currently navigate the sequencing of comments in that manner. We have the ability to put markers in text for changes in discourse across a transcript or a dialogue, like a call center dialogue. But in terms of like setting a series of comments down, somebody has a news article and there's a series of comments that we don't track the navigation or the sequencing of those. Any other questions? Okay, well, thank you very much. I appreciate it.
There's one other announcement that I forgot to make earlier that